You have seen this photograph. You may have taken it yourself. A row of tall, thin houses along a canal in Amsterdam. Brick faces, white window frames, each one a slightly different height from the one beside it. And every single one of them tipping forward, out over the water, as if the whole street were caught in the middle of falling and decided against it. It is some of the most photographed domestic architecture in Europe. Millions of people walk that water every year, and almost every one of them arrives at the same conclusion within about 4 seconds. The ground is sinking. It is a reasonable conclusion. It might be the most reasonable wrong conclusion available. Amsterdam is built on soft ground, and it does not hide that fact. The houses do not stand on rock because there is no rock. They stand on timber piles hammered down through the mud until they reach a firmer layer, and the entire city is balanced on the top of those piles like a table on a very large number of very thin legs. Everyone knows this. It gets mentioned on every tour, and it makes the lean feel solved before you have even finished looking at it. A soft city, an old building, a forward tilt. Of course it is sinking. So the lean gets filed away as charming decay. The phone goes back in the pocket. Nobody asks a second question, because the first answer felt complete. Here is what I am going to do with the rest of this video. I am going to leave the lean alone for a while. Not because it does not matter, but because it's the wrong place to start. And starting there is exactly why nobody gets to the interesting part. We will come back to it at the end, and when we do, I am going to tell you something about it that most videos on this subject will not. Start instead with the shape. Before the tilt, before anything else, look at how narrow those buildings are. Some of them are barely wider than the front door. You could stand in the street with your arms out and very nearly touch both edges of the facade. Then look up, and the same building runs 4, 5, 6 floors into the sky, and if you could see through it, you would find it running back away from the canal for 20, 30, 40 meters. A house shaped like a filing cabinet standing on its end. There is a story about why, and you have almost certainly heard it. It is in the guidebooks. It is on the walking tours. It is repeated by very confident people on the internet, and it goes like this. The city taxed houses by the width of their canal frontage, so people built narrow to pay less. It is a wonderful story. It has everything. A greedy city, a clever citizen, and a whole skyline as the punchline. It also has a problem, and the problem is chronology. By the time those frontage taxes existed, the canal ring had already been dug, and the houses were already standing on it. The narrow shape came first. The tax arrived to find it waiting. You cannot be the cause of something that was already there when you showed up. Remember that sentence. It is going to come back, and it is not going to be comfortable. So park the tax. The real answer starts with a question nobody asks about a canal. What is a canal for? Not what does it look like. What is it for? In 17th century Amsterdam, that water wasn't decoration and it was not drainage. It was the road. It was the main road. Goods came into that city by ship and left that city by ship. And between those two moments, they moved through the town on water, because moving a barrel of anything over land was slow, expensive, and in a city built on soft ground, sometimes impossible. Which means the canal frontage was not a view. It was a loading dock. Now the shape makes sense, and it makes sense the way a factory floor makes sense. If the water is the road, then every meter of canal edge is a meter of access. It is the most valuable dimension in the city. And the way you get the most value out of it is to give as many buildings as possible a piece of it. So the plots were laid out narrow, on the order of 5 to 7 meters of frontage each, not to dodge a tax, to multiply the number of front doors that could touch the water. Everything else about the house follows from that one decision, and follows with a kind of grim logic. You cannot go wide, because wide is expensive, and wide is rationed. So you go back, deep into the block, away from the canal. And you go up, and the moment you go up, you have created the problem that this video is actually about. Because a merchant's house was not only a house, the upper floors were storage. That is where the goods went. Grain, tobacco, textiles, spice, whatever that particular family traded in, hauled off a boat at the front door and put upstairs until it was time to sell it. So, now think about the staircase. In a building 5 meters wide, a staircase is a luxury you cannot afford. Every centimeter it takes is a centimeter stolen from a room, so the stairs in those houses are brutal, steep, narrow, turning hard, closer to a ladder with pretensions than a staircase. They are still there. People still live with them. Ask anyone who has moved house in central Amsterdam and watch their face change. Now carry a barrel up one. You cannot. That is not an exaggeration, and it is not a matter of being strong enough. Geometrically, physically, the object does not fit through the turn. A chest, a crate, a bed, a cask of anything. The staircase is not a route for those things. It never was. It was never designed to be. Which leaves exactly one question, and it is the question that shaped the entire skyline. If the goods cannot go up the inside, how do they go up? They go up the outside. Look at the top of any of those houses. Right at the peak, above the highest window, sticking out into the air over the street, there is a beam, a wooden beam, usually with an iron hook hanging off the end of it. And on many of them, the hook is still there, still bolted in, centuries after the last cargo came off the last boat. That is a crane, not a decorative flourish, not a bit of gable ornament. A crane, built into the roof, rated for the family business, hanging over the canal. A rope goes over the hook. A load goes on the rope. Somebody hauls, and the barrel rises up the front of the building, past the windows of your kitchen and your bedroom, until it reaches the storage floor. Then it swings in through an open window and lands on the boards. And this is not a detail that got left behind by accident. The system kept being improved. By the 18th century, builders were putting a hatch into the cornice at the top of the facade, so the beam could be reached more easily. That is what a working machine looks like. Somebody kept upgrading it. Put yourself on that street on a working morning. A flat barge comes down the canal and ties up at the edge, level with the front step, because the front step is the key. The hatch on the top floor is already open, and somebody is leaning out of it. A rope comes down the front of the house. The load goes on the rope. Nobody is inside carrying anything. The whole operation happens in the open air on the face of the building, above the heads of everyone walking past. And it happens at every house on the row, all day, for 200 years. That is not a house with a quirk. That is a warehouse with a family living in the bottom of it. The water was the road. The facade was the loading bay. The window was the door. And the beam did the lifting. You have walked under those beams. There are thousands of them, and they are all still up there, in plain sight, on one of the most photographed streets in Europe, and almost nobody looks up far enough to see them. Now, we can come back to the lean. And here is where I have to be straight with you, because this is the part where most videos about Amsterdam tell you something clean and confident, and the clean, confident version is not settled. The popular explanation is the one that fits everything you have just heard. Picture the barrel going up. A rope hanging from a hook at the top of a tall building, a heavy load on the end of it, hauled by hand from below. That rope does not hang in a clean line away from the wall. The load hangs almost flat against the brick, and as it rises, it swings, because everything on a rope swings, and every swing brings 100 kilos of something hard into the facade. Tilt the top of the building outward, and the whole wall leans away from the path of the load. The rope hangs clear. The barrel rises through open air instead of scraping up a wall. The Dutch have a term for building that way. Op de vlucht, on the tilt. It is a beautiful explanation. Everything in the video points at it. And there are Dutch heritage voices who say it is wrong. Their objection is not vague. It is the same objection this video already used once, and it is just as sharp-pointed this direction. The hoisting beam, as a standard feature, dates from around 1600. Facades in Amsterdam were already being built leaning forward before that. The tilt is older than the beam. You cannot be the cause of something that was already there when you showed up. Their alternative goes back further, to when these houses were made of wood instead of brick. Timber buildings were built in steps, each floor jutting slightly out over the one below, which is structurally straightforward in wood, and has the useful side effect of sheltering the floor beneath from rain. When masonry replaced timber, you cannot stack stone in steps that way. So the builders kept the forward angle as a continuation of the older form. The guilds preserved it as a tradition, and when the guilds were abolished at the end of the 1700s, the leaning facade went with them, and buildings started going up plumb. There is a second piece of evidence in that argument, and it is the one that is hardest to answer. If the tilt were purely functional, why is it only ever on the front, not the sides, not the back? A structural or practical solution should not care which wall it is on. A visual and cultural convention would care very much. So, which is it? Honestly, it is disputed, and anyone who tells you otherwise is smoothing something over. The most defensible position is that the tilt and the hoist ended up working together beautifully. Whatever brought the tilt into existence first, and that a leaning facade absolutely does help a load clear the wall, whether or not that is why the first one was built. There is also a third effect, quieter than the other two. A very tall, perfectly vertical building, seen from directly below at close range, appears to lean backwards. Your eye does it automatically. A forward tilt cancels it out, so the building reads as upright from the street, even though it is not. 3 explanations, at least 2 of them probably true at once, and no clean winner, which is a more honest ending than the one you were expecting, and I would rather give you that than a tidy story you would eventually find out was half invented, because the tidy story is not what matters here anyway. Walk back down that canal with what you actually know now. The narrowness is not charm. It is rationing of the only thing that mattered, which was contact with the water. The height is not ambition. It is the only direction left once width is gone. The staircase is not quaint. It is what you get when floor space is worth more than convenience. The beam is not decoration. It is the machine that made the house usable, and somebody was still improving it a century after it was installed. Every one of those things is a consequence of a single fact that is no longer true. The canal has not been a working freight road for a very long time. The boats on it now carry tourists, and the entire street is still standing in the exact shape that fact demanded, because buildings outlive the reasons for their own design, and stone does not update itself when the world moves on. You are not looking at old houses. You are looking at a machine that has outlived its function so completely that we now think of it as scenery. The city kept the hardware and threw away the manual, and millions of people a year photograph the hardware and call it pretty. And it is pretty. That is not the point. The point is that the prettiness is downstream. The width, the height, the depth, the beam, the placement of every window, set by cargo, not by taste. By the problem of getting a barrel from a boat into an attic without breaking either. Which raises a question you can carry out of here and use on almost anything. How much of what you find beautiful in a place is just an old solution to a problem nobody remembers having? Because this is not only Amsterdam, it is the normal condition of every old city you have ever admired. The width of a street is the turning circle of a cart. The height of a doorway is the height of the thing that had to come through it. The position of a market square is where two roads crossed for a reason that stopped applying before anyone alive was born. None of it was designed to be looked at. All of it is being looked at now. And the reason it survives is almost always the same. It survives because tearing it down costs more than leaving it alone, and then it stands there long enough that we start calling it heritage. The function dies. The shape gets protected. That is the sequence, and Amsterdam ran it to completion in public on the water, where you can still walk past the evidence. So the next time you are on that canal, do this. Find the beam first. Before the gable, before the reflection, before the bicycle leaning on the railing. Find the beam, and then follow the line it makes down through the air to the water. That line is the reason the house is that shape. The lean we can argue about. The beam is not up for debate. It is a crane on a roof, and it is still pointing at a road that stopped being a road, waiting for a boat that is not coming.